Your Bibles and turn to John chapter 21. We are in the final chapter. It's hard to believe after 2 years of mostly being on, but often a number of times being off in other series through the book of John, and God has taught us so much. I want to invite you, perhaps even today, if you get our newsletter, perhaps even before you leave the service, at least send yourself a reminder or jump on while you're even hearing teaching. I'll give a thumbs up for that. On our website, on the newsletter, you'll find a link to an email address, office@GraceWay, and what we're looking to do is collect those kind of key lessons, life lessons that you have learned from the book of John. And as we come to the very last Sunday of the year, the 26th, the day after Christmas, we will be gathering. And as we come together, we're going to try to compile those statements, so it'll be really helpful if you think it through and send some over. But we want to celebrate what we have learned from the Gospel of John. Obviously, the potential for it being truly life-transforming, this story of Jesus as told by the Apostle John. So we come to this text, and I'd like to read verses 1 through 14 of John 21, and then we'll jump in. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as the day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved, therefore, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Let's pray together. God, in your goodness, you have revealed yourself to us. You have given us your word. You have given us your spirit. You have given us this group of people and believers across the globe so that we might hear your truth, believe your truth, and live your truth, and this truth about Jesus that we've been studying in the Gospel of John. And I pray, God, that you would continue to call us into faith and belief in who Jesus is, that our lives might be yielded over to him, that we would see this relationship as the most important relationship above all other relationships. And though Jesus is far more than a possession, that we would see him as the greatest thing that we have, and therefore a relationship with you. God, I pray that you would help us sort out our value system this morning, That the truth about Jesus and what Jesus calls us to would be greater than the next thing on our to-do list. God, I pray that what we learn about Jesus in this text would compel us to understand that he is the greatest gift at a time when so many people are thinking about how to sort out what gifts to purchase for others. God, through this time, would you exalt Jesus in our minds as the one who has died in our place, giving us the opportunity to be restored to the God who loves us, and the one who longs to lead our lives, this one who is gentle and lowly and does not batter us into submission, but invites us to come, follow. Help us to hear with fresh ears, to see with open eyes. May the light of the glorious gospel shine in the face of Jesus Christ for us this morning. Do things that we cannot accomplish on our own, because without you, we can do nothing. Humble us with this, but encourage us in this, that with you, by your power, by your strength, we know that whatever you call us to do, you will equip us for and empower us to accomplish. Strengthen us with these things, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. When I was a kid, I remember a handful of memories about my father, who passed away when I was 8. Most of you know that. One thing that my father loved to do that I remember very vividly was fishing. I remember him taking me and my sister fishing. I think my sister, who is Krista, who sings up here, if you didn't know that, but Krista and I would go out. I think Krista enjoyed the fishing a little bit more naturally than I did. I don't know that I could ever say I loved it, but I remember it, and it was among the few memories of my father, so I do cherish it. Not something I do very much, but I remember as a kid being taught how to fish and thinking this is just the strangest thing. First, I think back in those days you could stop at Wawa and you could get bait. And so you would stop at Wawa and you would get fresh bait. And to me it was the strangest and even most disgusting thing to reach into that dirt, to grab the worm, to put it on the hook, right? And then throw it into the water, and then you just wait. And you watch that bobber, and you watch that bobber, and you watch that bobber. Now, once you caught a fish or two or three, it got a little bit more exciting. But then when you catch the fish, what do you have to do? You have to get it off the hook. And that was even more strange. Why are we putting our fingers into fish's mouths? This is odd. This is awkward. This is not fun. I never enjoyed that part. I always handed it over to my dad. Or maybe you're thinking, I want to get a really sweet spot kind of in this little sort of nook on a lake, and there'll be bushes all around, and then you got to make sure that you don't cast too far, because you want to get near those bushes that are over near the edge, because fish are there, but you don't want to get in the bushes, so you just got to be so careful. So to be good at fishing, just like anything, it would take some time and some learning and some things that might even seem counterintuitive, or at least not something we would naturally do or pursue. Now, most of us have fished very differently than any of the fishing going on in this story, but just as we might need some lessons in how to fish well, today I think we learn from this text, as Jesus, who is now dead, buried, and risen again, has met with his disciples at least 2 times, or certain subsets of them. People know that this is the risen and living Jesus, and Jesus knows that he is about to ascend to his Father for the last time and go to be in heaven to sit at the right hand of God. And so he wants to, in a very vivid way, teach something about his love and his character and his desire for good things for his disciples, but also he wants to teach, it seems, something for all of us who are followers of Jesus indeed. He wants to teach us something about what it means to live the mission, to follow after him and continue what he began. And so we have this string of stories here in chapter 21. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to look at some general principles that we can learn from as Jesus interacted with his group of disciples. And then as we get toward the end of the story, you'll see one of those characters sort of being siphoned off and the story being developed around especially the character of Peter. Next week, Daniel Castle's going to come, and he's going to do a little recap, perhaps, and set up the story of just what was happening between Jesus and Peter, which I think is a powerful, powerful story, and I would encourage you not to miss that one. I think all of us can find a little bit of Peter in ourselves, and so it's a great story to connect to. So that's where we're going. But for today, I want to speak from this text under the title of Fishing Lessons. Fishing lessons, lessons for a life of ministry. If you don't like the word ministry, I remember hearing the word minister and ministry as a kid and feeling like that's an old-fashioned word. Lessons for a life of making disciples. Lessons for a life of following in Jesus' footsteps. Lessons for a life of doing what Jesus has called us to do. However you might fill in that blank, you get the idea. Now, as we look at this passage, if you even look down to verse number 1, you'll see even the fourth word in. After this, Jesus revealed. He revealed himself. And then if you look down at verse 14, you'll see this. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples. So one's active, Jesus revealed himself. The other, he was revealed, of course, revealed by himself, but also by the Father. And so you have this word revealed, which tells us that Jesus is coming to reveal something specific about himself, yes, to show that he was alive and in the flesh after having died on the cross. But he's also coming to reveal something specific, and so I'd like to think of this as a revelation sandwich, if you will. We start with the idea that Jesus is revealed simply because he's there. We finish with the idea that he is revealed, but just as you might see a sandwich sitting on a countertop and you could look from a distance and you see there's a piece of bread on the top and a piece of bread on the bottom, what you're probably most interested in is what's in the middle. And so I think what we find here between these two verses and in this section from verse 1 down to verse 14 is this revelation sandwich, Jesus revealing himself, but also a very specific message. And so with these two sort of bookends, these two pieces of bread in place, I want us to look then at the meat of this sandwich. What is Jesus revealing about himself? Well, let's take a moment to appreciate the setting. Let's look at verses 1 through 3. Here's what it says. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. The Sea of Tiberias is another name for the Sea of Galilee. Jesus and the disciples had been there a number of times. Miracles happened around that sea. Miracles happened on that sea. It's called the Sea of Tiberias because Tiberius Caesar established a city right along the side of the Sea of Galilee, and that city's name was Tiberias. So this is the Sea of Tiberias, this place where Jesus has been with his disciples before, and he goes up there. Now, in the other Gospels, it tells us that Jesus told his disciples, "Go meet me up in Galilee." So Jesus has told them to go up there because Jesus was going to reveal himself, and he was going to reveal a specific message. And he revealed himself in this way, verse 2. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee. Now, we've been in Cana before, but we've never been told that Nathanael was from Cana, so it's a little tidbit we could probably tease out a little further and see what significance it has. But we know we have Simon Peter, which, by the way, Simon Peter, it's a two-part name. When we first meet Peter in the Gospels, he's actually known more as Simon. Jesus gives him the name Peter, and what's interesting is you need to take close notice of how Peter is acting when toward the end of the Gospels he gets called Simon Peter. Because there's something reminding us that he's got his old ways and there are some new ways. But keep that in mind, tuck that away. So we have Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin. He was doubting Thomas that we talked about from last week that Jesus revealed himself to with the wounds in his hands and his feet and his side. Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee. Who are the sons of Zebedee? They're also the sons of thunder. James and John. Oh, there he goes again. John once more finds a way to refer to himself without referring directly to himself. John was there. John, the writer of this gospel, was an eyewitness of what took place. And he speaks of it that way. The sons of Zebedee and two others of his disciples. Those two poor guys, right? This came out, and John's gospel came out. Did you get to read John's gospel yet? Yeah, it's circulating through Asia Minor right now. Just hold on. It'll swing around eventually. And finally gets there, and they go, what? Andrew's like, you forgot me. Why'd you do that? Well, why didn't you name me? Well, we don't know why he did that, but we know that there are 7. There are 7 disciples here in this scene along with Jesus. Now, in this passage, some people make a big deal out of numbers. Sometimes in the scriptures, numbers are really important and really significant. Other times, people take a number and they stretch it as far as they can to have some sort of secret meaning. What we can say is a group of 7 is known as a number of completion. This is a complete enough group that they could verify the story. We'll go with that for now. Simon Peter says to the other 6, I'm going fishing. They said to him, we will go with you. So Jesus has told them to go up to Galilee. Any of you get antsy while waiting? Try to look for things to do while waiting? Some people say that when Peter did this, he knew that his future wasn't supposed to be in fishing for fish, but he sort of rebelliously, or sort of having discarded himself as being usable for Jesus, he says, I'm just going to go do what I used to do. Maybe that's in there. Some people make a big deal about that. The text doesn't tell us that's what's going through his mind. So perhaps, to think the best of Peter, Peter is saying, I just want to go do something. I'm tired of waiting. Jesus can find us. He can walk through walls, right? So Peter then says, I'm going fishing. And just to show the kind of natural leadership that Peter had, what do the rest of the disciples in the scene say to Peter? Well, I'm going to go with you. So they all go out so that they can go fishing. Now, what most scholars understand, what most students of the Bible would understand at this point, is that this idea of fishing, while it is a legit story, and it really happened, it seems to be an expanded metaphor to teach a spiritual lesson. Now, you have to be careful doing that in the Bible. You have to have reasons, like verses, that trigger you to think that this should be a metaphor, that we should understand has a broader meaning. Otherwise, you can go to branches and bushes and little creatures in the Psalms and other places, and you turn them into all kinds of things and extrapolate these ideas that aren't really in the Bible. And that's been done over and over and over again. So I just want to throw the flag here and say we better make sure that if we're going to talk about this as a metaphor, as most students of the Bible do, that we understand why we have the right to do that. So I want to come first of all to this metaphor of fishing and remind us of what is said, first of all, in John 20:21. If you have your Bible and can either thumb down to that or turn a page, John 20:21, we just preached this last week. Jesus came to be with his disciples, and he says, peace to you, peace be with you, as the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you. Reminding or telling the disciples that now that I've done my work, the thing that I've done, the essence of what I've come to do for the world, I am now sending you out to do the same thing. As the Father sent me, so I am sending you to proclaim that Jesus is the Son of God and the good news that Jesus will save sinners and he will lead their lives. And so with that as an immediate reference just behind us, and with perhaps some help from another gospel writer, let's say the Gospel of Mark, where in Mark 1:17, Jesus says, follow me and I will make you fishers of people. So there was an understanding among the disciples that they were to have a going ministry to do, and they were being sent to do what Jesus came to do. They had an understanding of this metaphor, right, that Jesus would take them, and when they followed him, make them into fishers of men. People who, by sharing the gospel message, the truth about Jesus and what it means to be loyal to him, it would be like a net, which again, we don't use nets. How many of you, anyone ever use nets for fishing in here? Yeah, cool. Okay, so talk to them because they can speak to this a little better than we probably could. But they would throw nets and gather fish, and in that way, Jesus said, I'm going to send you to go and gather fish. So with those 2 points, and we could do more to build this out, I want us to embrace this passage as a metaphor for the mission that believers are sent to do and sent by Jesus. So let's then focus on, first of all, the Lord's commission. The Lord's commission, back to John 20:21, and then in Mark 1, is that of fishing for people. Let me ask you this. As you hear this, many of you are familiar with this metaphor. Are you a fisher for people? Do you wake up in the morning and gather your metaphorical nets and take those nets into your family, to your workplaces, across the street to your neighbors, and figure out what it means to throw that net so that you might catch a person? Now, not to catch, right, in some weird, awkward way to, trap them and manipulate them, but rather that with the message about Jesus being thrown out into the waters, the choppy, by the way, waters of life, that net could fall in such a way that it could catch them, that they might be drawn into Jesus and become his catch, his fish. That is the Lord's commission. And one thing that I want us to do, church, GraceWay, as we look into 2022, is say we need to make sure as a church that we are committed to that mission. We need to, as a church, be sure that we are obedient to the calling of Jesus to his first disciples that has been passed on to every disciple. And I want to say, church, some of us are good at throwing nets, and others of us don't know what a net looks like. This is not a rebuke, but rather an invitation for us to say, well, this is what Jesus sent his disciples to do. How can we grow and be sure that we're doing this and doing this well? So the entire first 2 months of the 8 weeks, I'll put it that way, which sounds shorter, 8 weeks or 2 months. Anyway, the first part of the new year, we are going to do a deep dive into what it means to throw our nets and then what to do with the fish that are caught, that we would be passionate, intentional, obedient, Jesus-following disciple makers as a church, and therefore as individuals and as small groups, and so that we know we are doing the mission, because the mission is getting increasingly diluted. When you look at trends in church growth or church emphases, we have to be very careful that we always keep the main thing, because in every generation, some issue or a multiple set of issues will rise up that we find ourselves saying, well, if you're really a follower of Jesus and you're on mission, you will do that, or you will do that, or you will do that, or you will do that. And maybe we should do that, but here's what I do know for sure. Whatever we're doing, we ought to be catching fish, people, with nets that have been thrown intentionally and making disciples. So let's make sure we're doing that. That's my heart for us as a church, to go forward into this and embrace this and say, we are fishers of men. Some of us say, that is such an old-fashioned metaphor. Okay, come up with a new one, but I don't know that we can improve on the Bible. Let's just understand the point that he's making and lean hard into it. All right, the Lord's commission then is fishing for people. So now when we look at this story, we have both a real story that was happening, but a metaphor to teach us a larger spiritual lesson. So let's get then to this next point. By the way, I have 7 of these, and Brian, I didn't cheat and make them doubles, okay? Brian called me out last week. He said, I saw what you did there. You said you had 5 points, and then you put an ampersand between each word, and you actually had 10. So I did do that. All right, here we go. 7 of these. First, the Lord's commission is fishing for people. The next fishing lesson that we have is what we find in the disciples' predicament. The disciples' predicament. Let's look to the second half of verse 3. So they go out to fish. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught what? Nothing. They caught nothing. There's no goofy sort of backward way to say this Greek word means anything other than nothing. They did not have one fish in their net or in their boat. There was nothing happen. Now, these are professional fishermen. Their livelihood depends on it. They were out at night, which is the ideal time to go and fish. One, the fish would move about in their schools in such a way that they could track them, know where they were, go to the hot spots, and then upon catching them with no refrigeration in the day, they needed to get those fish quickly to market and couldn't go for half a day in order to have fresh fish. And so they would fish at night, and as the sun came up, they'd get to the markets. This is what they did. And let's say Peter thought, I guess I'll go back to a career of fishing. Well, this would have been a bummer of a first day, right? Is this how it's going to be? Maybe that brought him into check. If he was going fishing for fun, it wasn't very fun anymore. Probably most likely he was going fishing because they were hungry. And you got to eat. So they were looking for fish so that they could eat. But the predicament they find themselves in is something that they can do nothing about. They can't make the fish swim into the net. And they can't seem to find the spots where the fish are, despite them always being there on other days and at other times. Verse 4, just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. So now we have Jesus enter the scene, but they don't know that it's Jesus. So let's just hold that there and take a moment to apply this to the metaphor of catching fish. If you're a disciple of Jesus and you have been called to be fishers of people and throw gospel nets that might catch people in a way that they can be drawn to Jesus and become followers of him, here is our predicament, church. Here is our predicament any day of the week, any year, any time, any season of life. We have no ability within ourselves to make something happen. We are powerless to do something spiritually meaningful for someone else or in the life of someone else. We do not have what it takes to be successful fishers of men and women and children. We don't have what it takes. We are in ourselves incapable. Our human inability becomes obvious when we do things in our own strength. And so these disciples are out there. They're just trying to catch real fish, and they can't get a thing. Fishing all night long. Now, by the way, this isn't the first time this has happened. This has happened in other places in the Gospels, at least one other place. And Jesus had given them some instructions. And so that's what Jesus does this time as well, to change the situation. How do we move from having no ability of our own to see someone become a follower of Jesus, even though we're trying to speak good words and do good things and all of this? What has to happen? Well, first of all, the presence of Jesus. But in this case, I want to very quickly attach his word to that presence. Because you see Jesus on the scene. They don't even know it's Jesus, but what does he do? He begins to speak. He speaks his words. And what we find is Jesus gives a straightforward command after a question that was probably a little annoying to them when they heard it, perhaps. Verse 5, Jesus said to them, "Children." Now, different things are made of this word children. Now, Jesus has every right, in one sense, to say, "You're my beloved young ones in this journey." Some say, "You all are living and acting like children, and you need to grow up spiritually, and I'm going to help you do that right now." So some see it as a term of endearment. Beloved ones, friends. One way or another, they don't seem to react negatively to this. Maybe it's because the question that he asks is what got them or annoyed them or was the most noticeable thing. Jesus said to them, "Children, professional fishermen, do you have any fish?" They answered, "No." Got nothing. Unsuccessful. Unable to make a catch. Verse 6. He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." Okay, these boats were not massive. It's not as if, like a cruise liner, you go to the other side, you drop a net, I don't know, how wide are those things? 200 feet further than you were before. Perhaps legitimately you could imagine there being a school of fish on this side, but not on that. No, this is 7.5 feet. A Middle Eastern ancient fishing boat would be about 7.5, 8 feet wide. So it's not like you're in some new magical spot by picking up the net and throwing it to the other side. And despite them being professional fishermen who could have said, "We know what we're doing, thank you," they pick up their nets, compelled by this voice. They go to the right side of the boat, and they throw the net. They do what he said. And what did he say? It was a simple command. Go to the right side of the boat and throw the net in. And he says what? You'll find some. Maybe you could add to this a straightforward command with a very clear promise. You could add the very clear promise part in there. Go to the right side, drop it in, and you'll find some. And so we see the Lord's presence and his word being spoken. Church, let's consider this when we draw it out to that broader metaphor than the spiritual truth of catching spiritual fish. It's not complicated in one sense. It's not. If we are listening to the voice of Jesus, which comes to us through his word and is verified and expanded perhaps specifically by his Spirit, if we are listening, he will make clear what we ought to do in order to catch fish. He will make it clear. He will lead us and guide us based upon our gifts, but most of all, based upon his word. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing comes by the word of God. So proclaim the word, preach the word, teach the word, share the word. Share the good news. There's a simplicity to it, which is why I think it's just so important that we as a church get our heads and our hearts around the simplicity of it and figuring out what it means for us. For them, it meant go to the right side of the boat. It could have meant go to the left. I don't think there's anything symbolic of left or right. Maybe there is if I study further. But I got enough here to say it's just a simple command of Jesus, and he says, go do this simple thing. And they're thinking, I don't know, really? We'll do what you want. We have a little bit of energy left, so here goes. Which is kind of what they did before when Jesus called them to do it. So Jesus says, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. Now here's what I want us to notice. When it comes to this fishing lesson, and especially this lesson for fishing for people, notice the next part. It's just in a short phrase, and it's this. We go from the Lord's presence and his word to the disciples' response. And the disciples' response is, despite how they might have felt about the kind of night they had, despite their cynicism that anything good was about to happen, and their skepticism, we find that their response is simple obedience. Simple obedience to the command of Jesus that would lead to a catch that they could not yet fathom. Just how incredible this catch would be. But their disciples' response is so simple in the second half of verse 6. What does it say they do? Almost immediately, so they cast it. So they did just what Jesus called them to do. And so must we do what Jesus has called us to do. We just better make sure we know what that thing is. And in each of the Gospels, and out of the mouth of Jesus, came this clear commission that we are to go and proclaim the gospel and not just speak words and walk away, but rather speak words and then draw people in with that net and then go and be part of the cleaning of the fish. That is making disciples. and developing those people into devoted followers of Jesus. So we're going to talk in the new year. In 2022, we are going to talk in the first 2 months and emphasize over and over and over again what it means to be faithful, to speak the truth about Jesus, to invite people to follow Jesus, and then we're going to say, now where is this person in their journey of following Jesus? And how can I help get them and be part of their journey so that they can move from this less mature place to a more mature place, where they move from being a childish Christian who can be very selfish but believes the truth, and move them toward caring about others and serving and being sacrificial, and eventually coming to a place where they want to give of themselves sacrificially so that more and more and more people can become disciples and followers of Jesus, so that they can experience his hope, they can experience his peace, they can experience his joy, they can experience his love and the life that comes through him. That's where we're going, because that's where every Christian ought to go. We just want to make sure we go there. And Jesus is leaving his disciples with this clear, vivid metaphor that I'm going to give you simple commands, and you need to simply obey those commands. Trust me. That's why when we're kids, some of us perhaps sang, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Anyone, that's your generation, that's your era? Yeah. I mean, there's such a simplicity to that. And Jesus gives simple commands and calls us to follow. All right. The disciples' response is simple obedience. Well, then what? Check this out. Check out, not the disciples' success, the Lord's success. The Lord called them to it. The Lord is obviously showing that he is sovereign over where these fish are coming from, how these fish get to where they're going, because here's what happened, this third part of verse 6. And now they were not able to haul the catch in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved, which is John, therefore said to Peter, it is the Lord. Now, John was the first one who looked at the cloths in the tomb and recognized Jesus had risen from the dead, and it's true. And now he's the one sitting here, and he's watching this happen, and he's going, it's the Lord, that's him. They were not able to haul it because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, here's Peter, right? Peter's always going to go 100 miles in some direction. You just don't know which. Right? And so he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. So Peter was basically down to his boxers and working all night. And then he sees Jesus, and almost humorously, because generally when you're jumping in the water, you take clothes off and jump. So if anything, he could have just jumped in, but instead just, perhaps, this is the Lord. And I'm going to go meet him, and so I want to be modest. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's habit. But one way or another, John includes this detail where Peter grabs his coat, he puts it on. It probably meant he kind of wrapped it around. He kind of got all adjusted and then goes, I'm out. Peter's always in the water for one reason or another, right? He's walking on water. He's in the water. He's, help me get out of the water. Now he's back in the water. They're only 100 yards out. He throws himself into the sea. Why? Why did any of this happen? Because Jesus said, you'll catch some fish if you throw it on the right side of the boat. Throw it on the right side of the boat. And now this is such a huge catch of fish, it becomes hard to get it in. John realizes who this is. Peter responds, jumps in, starts swimming. All because of the Lord's success. Jesus delivered what he promised. And if Jesus delivered what he promised when it came to real fish swimming, controlling how those fish got there, did they materialize because Jesus said, let there be fish in that net, and there were fish in that net, like he did in Genesis? Or is it like the fish were just over here? Every time the net dropped, the fish moved back because it wasn't time to get in the net yet. And so they moved, and so the fish are kind of in this dance with the net all night long until Jesus says, get in that net. All the fish. Fill the net. An abundant catch because Jesus was in control of it. So what might happen if we obey Jesus in following this great commission, in throwing the net that he has given to us, the gospel net, the truth about Christ, and we throw it in the direction that we're able to throw it, and we do it on purpose, and we do it out of love, what might happen? That net might be filled with people who need to hear the word and truth about Jesus, and who, upon being caught in the net, are drawn to Jesus, believe in Jesus, and become our brothers and sisters in Christ to enjoy him forever. Jesus invites us into this, and he calls us into this, and he promises us he will do it. This supernatural abundance is on its way. Now, exactly what abundance should look like, we have to be careful defining, but that abundance would be on its way is just simply what Paul tells us, that our God does exceedingly far more above what we could ever ask or think. So let's start asking and thinking some things when it comes to throwing our nets and catching disciples and see what God does. And so that might mean some new adventures in 2022, or some old adventures that are brought to us in a way that we realize they have greater value than we ever realized. Okay, we see the Lord's success. Two more. What was the disciples' role? Not making the fish get in the net. The disciples' role is to faithfully haul the net that Jesus has filled. This means hauling the net of the gospel and drawing forward, as it were, whoever's caught in the net. Look at the verses. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire in place. When's the last time you saw a charcoal fire in this story? Got to back up to what character? It was the night Jesus was tried, the day before his crucifixion, and there was a charcoal fire. And it was in the court. It was in the court of the high priest. See if you can remember who was standing there, and Daniel will get to it next week. There was a charcoal fire in the place, which I think was Jesus doing something pretty powerful on purpose toward that character. With fish laid out on it and bread. What do you know? Jesus had food being cooked right there as they come on shore. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." Wait, I thought he had fish on the fire. Get to that in a moment. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. If you have a study Bible, it might go a number of different directions on what the 153 means. Here's what you can know. They were professional fishermen. When you get in the morning, probably without thinking, you start counting fish. And these were large fish. Mega is the Greek word, right? These are huge fish. And they are just packed into this net. So, they count them, and although there were so many, notice, the net was not torn. If we're to learn a spiritual lesson, what is to be said about what happens when we faithfully take the net of the gospel truth about Jesus, and we throw it with our words, and yes, actions that accompany that, but with our words, we cast that net very carefully, and it falls in such a way that it begins to catch people's hearts. What if it catches 5 hearts? What if it catches 10 hearts? What if it catches 15 hearts? What if it catches 500 hearts? Will the gospel, the net, be able to handle whoever gets caught in it? Yes. As full as this was, as abundant as was the catch, the gospel is not only sufficient to draw people to Jesus, it is sufficient to hold people close to Jesus forever so that he will never leave them and never forsake them, and they will never be lost. The net is strong enough. That's awesome. And so what do? Faithfully haul the net. All right, we've got to finish. The Lord's fellowship is the last part. So out of all of this, we've had the Lord's commission as fishing for people. The disciples' predicament was human inability. The Lord's presence or his word were straightforward commands with promises. The disciples' response was simple obedience. The Lord's success was supernatural abundance. The disciples' role was faithful net hauling. And finally, the Lord's fellowship is life-giving relationship with Jesus. What did they do? They come back. He's got food laid out for them. Now, this is also interesting, going back to that character with the whole charcoal fire thing and the guy who jumped in and all of that. It was, in the ancient world and in many places today, a symbol that if there was a rift between a relationship, a meal was a symbol that there was openness for that to be healed. Now, that's powerful, because who prepared that meal? Jesus. Jesus prepared a meal, and for everyone who's now coming to shore, and the swimmer, right, he's the first one, and he gets out, and he says, come here, eat with me. That's powerful, and we'll get to that next week. And then Jesus says, and bring some of the fish that you caught. Bring them over. As if to say, what I just did for you and the fruit of that labor, bring them over here with me, and we're going to celebrate that together. We're going to enjoy that together. What you did through what I did, we are going to be able to enjoy together in fellowship. And Jesus there invites those disciples to sit and eat with him and be as interpersonal as you can be in human relationships. Jesus said to them in verse 12, come and have breakfast. Now none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. So here's what this fellowship meant for them. One, it meant Jesus was saying, I forgive you. He was saying, I invite you. He was saying, I want to continue to serve you. He said, I will add your contribution to what I've already prepared. And he said, I will assure you of who I am over and over and over again. See, Jesus before said, abide in the vine. Because without me, you can do nothing. Without me, you can do nothing. With me, you can do anything that I want you to accomplish. And I know as we go forward as a church, and as you go forward as an individual Christian, and your family unit, and your small group, that Jesus wants us to go forward and make more and more and more disciples, like for real, in the dirt, in the trenches, helping someone move from a spiritual child to a spiritual adult, and tracking that journey. And that's what we're going to be talking about. To close out this time, we're going to celebrate the truth of the gospel. So team, come. We're going to sing God So Loved, which we began learning last week. As they're coming, we come back to verse 14. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead, reminding us, hey, this is true. Jesus really lives, and he really calls us on a mission and teaches these fishing lessons to his disciples. Here's what we learn. Let's put it into a nutshell. The Lord of the catch invites us today to handle the net of the gospel in order to accomplish his mission his way. He intends to empower and encourage us with the fellowship of, excuse the typo, his presence as we work hard to fish for people. Let's stand. I'll read that one more time, and we're going to sing. And as we sing, there are two questions that I have. One, have you been caught? And two, do you trust the Lord of the catch? Can you trust him with this command and just obey it? And have you been caught? And if you say, I don't know that I've been caught, this actually sounds kind of weird, this whole metaphor, but I might be interested to learn a little bit more about who Jesus is. We want to talk with you. These are important things. So here it is again. The Lord of the catch invites us to handle the net of the gospel in order to accomplish his mission his way. He intends to empower and encourage us with the fellowship of his presence as we work hard to fish for people. That's what we're going to do as a church. So let's just be reminded of this glorious gospel.